Hello, Willow Creek Farms. It is everybody's favorite time of year right now. I'm not talking about Thanksgiving, I'm not talking about Christmas. I'm talking about property tax time. That's right. It's that time of year when you go out to your mailbox and you open it up and you have your property tax statements from the various taxing authorities. My name is Jay Sawyer. I am on the board of directors of the Willow Creek Farms MUD. I've been on the board for 7 years, and in that time, I've gotten a really good understanding of how our property taxes work. And I'd like to start today and share some of that with you so that you understand also how your property taxes work, how we come about the property tax, as well as what are we doing on the board of the MUD to reduce your overall property taxes. Before I get into that, a quick disclaimer. This is not an official statement from the MUD Board of Directors. It has not been reviewed or approved by the MUD. These are my opinion, my statements, my views. They do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of other board members. That said, during this presentation, I will be talking about official board actions, stuff that we've done. And when I do that, I will refer to that as we or us. And so those will refer to official board actions that are a matter of public record. When I say I or me, that will be used to refer to either my very specific opinions or the work that I've done as a member of the board in my role as director, specifically around working with tax policy and figuring out what our taxes need to be. So let's start off with a quick review of what your property taxes are. Property taxes you pay go to fund local services, schools, roads, emergency services, infrastructure, that kind of stuff. And you will have multiple entities that collect those property taxes. The county is going to be separate from the utility district, it's going to be separate from the school district. This is something that we're all familiar with here in Texas. We don't have a state property tax. All of our property taxes are locally assessed and locally administered. Assessments and appraisals are done by the county appraisal districts. These are independent from the taxing entities. The taxing entities don't have any input into what those values are. Instead, the CADs provide the values to us that we use to calculate the tax rate. You can also go to the CAD's website, pull up your tax records. You'll have a tax history in there, and you'll be able to see what all of the entities are that tax your particular property. So let's start off with a couple of definitions. First, appraisals. As I just mentioned, the appraisal districts determine the market value of each property every year. Those values are current as of January 1. So the appraised values that you will see in your tax statement will be as of January 1 of 2025. These appraisals typically come out sometime in the spring, March, April, May timeframe, and you have the opportunity to protest them. When they do come out, there's always several real estate agents in the neighborhood that are happy to help you protest by pulling sales comparisons. That's going to be the method that the appraisal district uses to determine the value of our property. And so by comparing to similar properties in the area, you may be able to successfully challenge your appraisal and get it lowered. Now, the appraisal can increase by any amount every year. This is kind of what gets people because the appraisal is separate from the assessment. Now, the assessment is what is used to calculate the base value for your property taxes. It is based on the appraised value, but it may not be the same as the appraised value. Because for homesteads, the assessed value, that base value that is used to calculate your property taxes, can only increase by 10% per year. And a lot of people get confused in this. When they see their appraisal come out and their appraisal jumped by 25%, which we actually saw a couple of years ago here in Willow Creek Farms, they freaked out. My appraisal can only increase by 10% a year. Not quite. Your assessment can only increase by 10% a year. When your appraisal increases by more than 10%, that additional increase is put in what's called the homestead cap loss. Basically, that is an additional bucket of appraised value that then gets applied to your assessment every year in 10% increments. And so we have been seeing this process playing out over the past few years here in Willow Creek Farms, where we saw huge property jumps in 2021, 2022, and that value is continuing to be added into our assessment. This year, going into this tax year, we had about 50% of the residents of the homesteads in Willow Creek Farms that had 10% or more in their homestead cap. So that gives you an idea of how much the values went up, how quickly, but also kind of why your tax assessment keeps increasing. So that brings us to homesteads. Now, in Texas, the homestead is your primary residence. It is the home that you own and live in. And this has special legal protections and possibly tax benefits. Now, the homestead is going to be protected from most creditors, except for mortgages, taxes, and certain liens. I'm not going to get into all the details of that. I don't know all the details of that. But more importantly, to what we're talking about, homesteads qualify for special tax benefits. One of those is that the assessment can only increase by 10% a year. We're just talking about that. Homesteads also qualify for a school district exemption of $140,000. Now, this is mandated by the state legislature. And when you hear the state legislature talking about, or the various state level politicians talking about cutting your school taxes, this is what they're doing, actually, is they increase the amount of the exemption that the school district has to provide to the homestead. Homesteads may also qualify for additional exemptions. We'll get into those in a minute. Now, for the tax benefits, not for the legal protection, but for the tax benefits, you do have to apply with your county appraisal district to get those tax benefits. So if you haven't done that, make sure that you fill out your homestead and file it with the county appraisal district. If you haven't had it for a couple of years, you will get a refund. It will be retroactive for a year or two or three or something like that. So you'll actually get a check back from the various taxing entities, which is always a nice thing. But make sure that you have that filed with the appraisal district. It does not come automatically. So that brings us to property tax exemptions. Now, exemptions reduce the overall taxable value. This lowers your tax bill. The exemption amount is applied to the assessed value, not to the appraised value. And there is a homestead exemption that is required for school districts. I just mentioned that, the $140,000. Other districts may, but are not required to, grant a homestead exemption, and that can be up to 20%. There are exemptions for over 65 and disabled persons. For school districts, that is $60,000. Other districts, again, may grant one, but are not required to do so. There are disabled veterans exemptions. Now, these are required by the state. They are defined by the state legislature. The amount of the exemption varies based on the level of disability, with up to a 100% exemption for fully disabled veterans. Some other exemptions that are out there, there's ag, there's business personal property. The ag exemption is something that has played into our current tax situation that I'll talk about in a little bit. But other than that, there's various other ones that aren't really going to be applicable to us. Most, if not all, exemptions require an application to the county appraisal district. This includes homestead. This includes over 65. This includes disabled veterans. If you want information on that, go to the website for your CAD. They will have all of that information there available for you. So let's take a look at where these values show up in the appraisal district's website. So what I have here is from the property record for a property here in Willow Creek Farms. When we take a look at it, we can see that we have the appraised value. So the market value of this particular home according to the appraisal district, is $406,480. There is no ag value loss or ag exemption on this property. There isn't going to be for any of the homes. We're not farms. So the appraised value and the market value are going to be the same. Next, we see the homestead cap loss. So this is that homestead cap that I was just talking about a few minutes ago, where the market value increased more than 10% over a number of years. That additional value got put into the homestead cap, and then at the end of the day, the assessed value, the base value for taxes on this property, is $391,647. So now that we've talked about how our taxable value gets determined, let's talk a little bit about where your MUD taxes go. So the MUD has some core responsibilities. We're responsible for water, providing water service. We also operate the water plant. That water plant is jointly owned with Jordan Ranch. This has come up during things like some of the drought contingencies. Jordan Ranch owns 49% of that plant. They also pay 49% of the ongoing maintenance costs and repair costs. Additionally, for the daily operational costs, they pay according to how much water they use compared to Willow Creek Farms. So this has saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. It's had some challenges at times, but overall, it's been beneficial for us here in Willow Creek Farms. On the wastewater treatment plant, the plant is currently leased. We jointly operate it with Jordan Ranch. They have 35% interest in the current wastewater treatment plant. So the same kind of deal occurs with the wastewater treatment plant as we have with the water plant. Again, it saved us lots of money. We will be building a permanent wastewater treatment plant. I'm going to talk on that in just a little bit. And Jordan Ranch will no longer be participating when we do that. The MUD's also responsible for drainage. We handle the storm drains. We do maintenance on the detention ponds, make sure that we're draining properly. This is something that is an ongoing thing. We do parks. We've turned some of the detention ponds into more of an amenity pond, the fishing pier, as well as a playground that we built. We're responsible for police and fire services. These are contracts with the city of Katy. And then we also have bond debt service. So the district has issued bonds to pay for all of the core infrastructure that you see in the neighborhood. So things like the roads, the sewers, laying out the initial water plant, all that kind of stuff is paid for out of bonds. And so that is a pretty big component of where your MUD taxes go. There are three key components of your MUD tax. First is maintenance and operations. This goes into what can best be called the discretionary fund. We can spend this on anything that we have the authority to spend money on. This funds our daily operations and maintenance, and supplements the money that you pay for your water bill on a monthly basis, because the water bill itself does not fully fund or cover our daily maintenance and operations. We have the debt service. Now, the debt service funds are collected very specifically to repay the district's bonds that were used to build the roads and the other infrastructure. These funds can only be used for bond payments. We cannot take money out of it to use for something else. It is not a piggy bank or anything like that. We calculate the debt service based on payment schedules to ensure that the MUD can always pay its debts. We also have the fire tax. So this was authorized by an election that we had 5 or 6 years ago with the fire plan and with a contract with the city of Katy to provide fire services here in the Willow Creek Farms. Now, there are two key events that happen during the year when it comes to setting the property taxes for the MUD. The first is issuing exemptions. So these are done in the spring. They come before the appraisals are available. So we don't know how much value we're going to be working with to make the budget that we need to make. So that has been a challenge. Now, once the appraisals are issued, we go and we set our tax rate in the fall. Now, this is a two-step process. The first step is we publish the maximum tax rate. So when we publish that rate, we cannot go higher when we adopt it. But that is published ahead of time to give the public opportunity to see it, and to come and present their opinion at the second step, which is when the final rate is adopted after a tax hearing. So in that second step, we can go up to whatever that maximum rate that was published. We cannot exceed it. We can also go lower, so we don't have to go all the way up to what that published rate is. All of these are events that I typically publish and publicize here on the neighborhood Facebook pages, because I think they'll be of interest to folks as they are directly related to our tax bills. The exemptions that we offer here in WCF MUD, we have a homestead exemption of 16%. So this is up from 8% last year. So we were able to double the homestead exemption to 16%. For over 65 and disabled folks, we have a $20,000 exemption. This is up from $15,000 last year. To give you an idea of what this means on a tax bill, if we take that previous property that I was looking at, we forget about the homestead cap for a minute, right? And we take a look at its assessed value of $391,647. With no exemptions, that tax bill would be $4,503.94. The effective rate for the homestead, or well, that's not a homestead, the effective rate is $1.15. That is our nominal rate. For the homestead, however, we take 16% off of that taxable amount. So your taxable amount is now $328,983, which gives you a tax bill of $3,783, a $720 savings for individual homeowners. The effective rate, which would be the rate that you would pay for that assessed value, is $966 per $100 of value. So we've gotten that effective rate only for homeowners who live here in the district, only for homesteads under $1. Now, if you are over 65, we have that homestead exemption. You have to have the homestead in order to get the over 65. So that homestead exemption comes off first. You take off that 16%, and then you have another $20,000 that you are exempted from in taxable amount beyond that. So your final taxable amount would be $308,983 for a tax bill of $3,553 and $950 in total tax savings based on not having any exemptions at all. Now, we have been increasing exemptions year over year. We've been trying to since 2020. We started off with a $5,000 exemption for disabled folks. 2021, we increased that to $10,000. In 2022 is when we first did our homestead exemption. We kept the disabled exemption at $10,000 and granted a 3% homestead exemption. 2023, we went up to 6% homestead, $15,000 disabled. 2024, 8%, kept the disabled exemption at $15,000. And then for 2025, this year, the tax bills that you're getting, we have a 16% homestead exemption and $20,000 in for over 65 disabled folks. So let me take you in a little bit behind the scenes, kind of show what goes on. These are the calculations that I did and I put together this past spring when we determined our 16% homestead exemption. And this will show you kind of the things that we think about when we have to set the tax rate. So when we go into preparing to grant our exemptions, we know what the values were from the previous year. But what we don't know are what the values are going to be coming up. Now, in this case, what I did is I took our total assessment and taking the raw data from our tax assessor collector, I determined how much that homestead assessment would increase if the homestead cap, and only the homestead cap, was applied to the values of the homes. So I took that money that was kind of sitting in that homestead cap bank and added it into the valuations for homesteads. So this gives us a more accurate picture of what our values are going to be. This is not something that we would typically get from the tax assessor collector's office. In fact, this year I think was the first time they did it, because I've been doing this for a couple of years, and it's helped us make the case for those homestead exemptions that we've issued. So this is a calculation plus the 10% homestead cap. So this net taxable is based on what the net tax would be with the previous homestead exemption, which was 8%. And so this is the net cost of that exemption in total taxable value. Now, the other thing that is in here that you'll see is the non-homestead net taxable value. So this is things like personal business property, and a lot of it was really some of the commercial property. Landmark actually had quite a bit of this. But we also had $18 million in ag exemption. Now, this $18 million in ag exemption was for the Peterson tract. Now, because these values are as of January 1, 2025, that property is no longer ag exempt because they broke ground in October. So taking that $18 million, adding that in to our non-homestead net taxable value gives us, $102 million. And so I use that in our calculations as well. Looking at this, it was probably safe to assume that the valuation of that property would be more than 18 million. But we really couldn't count on that. So we used that 18 million number. Again, as our baseline to kind of go through a worst case scenario. To calculate what our debt service needs to be, we have this fun spreadsheet where we start with a starting value, how much we have in our debt service account, how much we pay out that year, make sure that we have enough debt service for the next year. And so you'll see that this goes through and make sure that this never hits zero and that we can fund and pay back all of our debt. There are some assumptions based in there, but we also know that next year and the year after, we're going to see significant increases, so we're in pretty good shape there. Now, once I determine what that debt value is, our fire value is going to be kind of tied very closely to ESD 200, so that's kind of set. Then we have the maintenance and operations to play with. We have a certain target that we need to hit, a certain budget, and so that's what we see up here. And then I just worked with how much of an exemption we could apply, how much it would affect the revenue, and making sure that we had enough revenue to come in to cover our operational costs. So this was quite a bit of work. It's not stuff that we would get necessarily from the tax assessors or the financial folks, but doing this kind of work has let us come in and put in these homestead exemptions actually a good deal of time before the consultants would tell us that we could. And it has left us in a very, very good position to pass on savings directly to homeowners first and foremost, and get more revenue from that commercial to fund things here in the district. Taking a look at the property tax history here in Willow Creek Farms, and I'm including the fire tax all the way back, even when it was ESD 200, to make sure that we're looking, apples to apples. Back in 2007, all the way up to 2014, we were looking at $1.35 as the tax rate. Starting in 2015, we were able to bring these tax rates down. But you'll see that the effective rate, and by effective rate, I mean the effective rate for homesteads, was the same as the full tax rate. And that continued until 2022, when we first issued our homestead exemptions. And so you'll see that from 2022 to 2023, we had a 5-cent increase in the top level tax rate, but a much smaller increase in the effective rate due to the increased homestead exemption. Since 2023 and 2024 and 2025, our homestead exemption has increased and reduced that effective rate for resident homeowners only. And that for me is kind of the key thing is we are providing tax savings to the folks who own and live here first before we provide tax savings to investment companies or commercial property or anything like that. And that's something that's been very important to me and that I've worked very hard to make the case for the full board to grant these exemptions. And we've been able to do that. So that brings us to talking about the impact of Texas Heritage Marketplace. Now, we're already seeing this. Texas Heritage Marketplace is a part of Willow Creek Farms MUD. That particular land is all a part of our district. When the district was initially formed, that area was included with the intent for it to be commercial property. The vision for that commercial property initially, way back when, is much smaller than what is actually being put out there. In fact, some of the early plans included additional residences over in that area. Instead, we're getting a massive retail. In fact, it's my understanding that it's one of, if not the largest retail project currently going on in the country. So it's huge, and it is going to have a massive impact on the property taxes here in the district because we collect property taxes from that marketplace. Once the stores open, this will also include inventory. We do not have any tax abatements on any property in Texas Heritage Marketplace. Now, the revenue this year, which is based on the value as of January 1, 2025, when really all they had was flattening and maybe a little bit of concrete. The revenue this year is $280,000 from Texas Heritage Marketplace. That is about the same amount of revenue as we get from 72 resident homeowners. We'll also be getting 3 years of back taxes. We haven't included that in any of our budgeting calculations. That's going to kind of be a nice to have when it comes in. But that's going to come in from the canceling of the ag exemption. It's something I've been trying to keep an eye on, but apparently the appraisal districts are rather slow to issue the statements for these for whatever reason. Now, once stores open, the MUD will be able to collect a penny in sales tax revenue. So the current estimate for this is $3 million a year, and it's my understanding that that's actually probably kind of on the low end. It will probably wind up being significantly more. Because there is a lot of interest in Texas Heritage Marketplace all the way out to like the Sealy area. So there's going to be folks coming in from much further out west to shop at Texas Heritage Marketplace, which is going to provide Willow Creek Farms with sales tax revenue. Now, there is one caveat here. So as part of building the infrastructure, the MUD is responsible, in fact, for building infrastructure, even for Texas Heritage Marketplace. So things like the roads, the drainage, that kind of stuff, we're responsible for that. So we're contributing $20 million to building that infrastructure. And that $20 million will be paid from the proceeds of the sales tax revenue. So that did not require any new bonds. It won't require any additional taxes. It is all going to be coming out of that net new sales tax revenue that we're going to be getting from Texas Heritage Marketplace. At $3 million a year, that will take us about 7 years to pay off. But again, even in that time, we will be able to collect additional revenue from the property value in Texas Heritage Marketplace. And that's going to allow us to really reduce taxes and reduce your water bill pretty significantly moving forward into the future. Looking ahead, 2026, we should have another increase in property value from Texas Heritage Marketplace. I don't have any idea. I don't have any real way of estimating what that's going to be. but it's going to be pretty significant. They have made a significant amount of progress this past year, and that is going to increase the valuation. They are already the single greatest taxpayer in the district. On the MUD, I'm going to be looking to increase the homestead exemption to 20% next spring. When we did the homestead exemption this past year, certainly the feeling among the board, at least at that point in time, was that we would go to 20%. And certainly I'm going to be working to push increasing that homestead exemption to the maximum 20% next spring. 2027 tax year should see that significant increase in values, primarily, well, really exclusively from Texas Heritage Marketplace. That's going to allow us to reduce the overall tax rate. But before we do that, I want to start reducing the overall water bill. In addition to that, I'd also like to start funding additional projects such as parks and amenities. I think that there are some small things that we can do now, some additional benches and trash cans and that kind of stuff in a couple of places here in the district. But moving forward, there's going to be a lot more that we can do because, again, we'll have this influx of revenue from Texas Heritage Marketplace. And so we can still provide significant savings to residents as well as add value and do quality of life type of projects here in the neighborhood. Now, once the Willow Creek Farms contribution is paid off, say 2034, 2035, that's kind of the longest, that's the most pessimistic view. Those sales tax funds will come directly to Willow Creek Farms. We have fewer restrictions on how we can utilize the funds from sales tax dollars versus the funds from property tax dollars. So we'll be able to look at doing a bunch of stuff that right now, legally, we cannot do. That said, that's pretty far out in the future. The one challenge and the one thing that comes into play here, though, is at some point in time, City of Katy is going to want to annex us. Probably get the idea that there is a lot of money, a lot of tax dollars coming out of Texas Heritage Marketplace. And at some point, the City of Katy is going to want to grab on to that money, and they're going to annex us. It's not a question of if, it's really a question of when. So there's a couple of things that we can do to kind of push that off. But we will also want to really focus on, using some of this additional funding and adding value to the district as quickly as we can to make sure that we get that value here in Willow Creek Farms before the City of Katy comes in and annexes us. One of the ways that we'll be able to do that is to continue to hold bond debt. That will help delay the inevitable. But how long we're going to be able to delay that remains to be seen. Also looking forward, we have one other really big project going on right now at the MUD, and that is the wastewater treatment plant replacement. We will be building a permanent wastewater treatment plant. Our current plant is leased. It's currently costing us here in Willow Creek Farms $5,400 a month. It's actually costing Jordan Ranch more. And we will be building a new permanent plant. We issued a $9.2 million bond to fund the construction of that plant. We don't have any of the bids yet. We'll be advertising for bids in the next month or two. This is taking longer than I would like it to. I really want to get these bids out and get that budget secured for that wastewater treatment plant. The target for the start of construction of this is March 2026. It's expected to take about 2 years or so. Some of the equipment that is required for this has a lead time of 9 to 12 months. So there's really not much of a way that we're going to be able to get this done very quickly. Unfortunately, that is just how some of these things are. As more details come in, I will certainly be sharing these to let folks know, hey, this is starting or when it's going to be completed. Thanks for joining me. I hope you found this session informative. My name is Jay Sawyer. I'm one of the directors here on the Willow Creek Farms MUD Board of Directors. And it's always my goal to be very open and transparent with the folks here in Willow Creek Farms. And of course, key to that is helping you understand what we're doing from a tax perspective. I've also worked very hard over the past couple of years to push forward for that homestead exemption, to ensure that our homeowners get the tax benefits from Texas Heritage Marketplace, first and foremost. And I'm really happy to kind of see all of that starting to come together. I'm really excited for what we're going to be able to do in the next couple of years to reduce the tax rates that we pay here in Willow Creek Farms, as well as enhance the quality of life in the community. If you like this, great. Let me know. If you want more, I'm certainly happy to do that. But again, let me know. And until next time, again, thanks for joining me. If you have any questions, please let me know. And you can also always contact the MUD at wcfmud.com/contact us. I get all of those messages and reply to them personally. They are also shared with the rest of the board.